I'm Trevor Fishlock, and we are off on a quest along canals, lakes and rivers and estuaries that shaped our history, shaped us. So we're in our element, exploring British and Irish waterways. A boat always suggests adventure, and in this waterway quest we explore the rivers and canals of Wales and southern England. From here on Britain's longest river, the Severn, to the breathtaking River in the Sky in North Wales, to the gentle, poetic Avon, and with a proper salute to the senior river of Britain, the Thames. We go with the flow.
We begin in North Wales on the Llangollen canal and sense the harmony of water and trees. Bright barges and the romantic life afloat. The landscape symphony of the winding River Dee. It's a spectacle that's always exhilarating, taking us through time to a dynamic age of engineering. The aqueduct at Chirk, built by the visionary Thomas Telford and his engineer William Jessup. Their ingenuity created water highways through the hills, as Peter Birch from British Waterways explains.
This canal was a great challenge to the engineers constructing it. It was one of the first of what we call the heroic age of canal construction, because instead of meandering around hillsides and avoiding most of the obstacles like early canal engineers did, Telford and Jessup and their colleagues chose a much more straight and direct route. And that, of course, with the technology they had of the day, was tremendously challenging. Chirk Aqueduct was, when it was constructed, the biggest, the highest bridge, highest navigable aqueduct of the day.
In the distance, Thomas Telford's masterpiece, completed 1805, the Pontcysyllte aqueduct, the river in the sky, fed from the famous Horseshoe waterfall.
Crossing the Dee Valley at Pontcysyllte was a huge challenge. The canal was coming in at a level over 100 feet above the level of the river. Nobody had built a structure that tall in the United Kingdom at that age, of that sort of size. And really they wanted to build something smaller and have a series of locks dropping down to it. But the problem with that is that then you've got locks on both sides and you're losing an awful lot of water in the middle back into the river. They would have needed very large pumping engines, steam powered, to bring all the water back up to keep the locks going. And the canal company were concerned that that was going to be tremendously expensive. So the challenge for Telford and Jessup as the lead engineers was to try and come up with a way in which they could save the company some money by building something different. And so the final design came out of being these enormously tall piers, 130 odd feet high, and then a 1,000-yard long, effectively cast iron bathtub across the top of it. And this was tremendous. It was unbelievable. Nobody had seen anything like it before. And the aqueduct was so breathtaking as built that people flocked from all over the country to see it, and many people painted it and wrote stories and poems about it, and its fame grew really from there.
"10,000 narrowboats cross every year, an endless salute to Thomas Telford's achievement of beauty and endurance."
It's lasted sort of 200 years, and the maintenance for the main trough, nothing's been done to it. Very little since the day it was built. We dewater between 6 and 10 years probably, and dewatering is physically taking the water out of the canal. We pull a plug in the middle, the water falls then into the River Dee, where it originally come from, and we do our inspections or whatever maintenance we need to do. We inspect every nut and bolt on it. We look at the joints, what the joints are like, the towpath condition, the hand railing. It's such a simple process, really. Fairly uniquely to canals, we feed water supply to Crewe and Nantwich down this canal. Hence this canal, the water travels a little bit faster than most canals. So anybody using a canoe or a boat or anything like that, particularly past locks or byways, they think, hey, yep, what's going on here? There's a bit much water coming at us. It gives an extra little bit of spice to cruising on the Llangollen Canal. My patch consists of the Llangollen and the Montgomery canals. The Llangollen is probably the busiest canal in the country, and the Montgomery is probably the quietest. And the rural views through the valleys, up through Wellspool and up through Llangollen here, and then every now and again you get a little crown line. You get the tunnels coming through, and you get Chirk aqueduct with a viaduct right next to it, and you think, wow, this is absolutely amazing. And then you hit this, and suddenly there's no handrail on the side, and you think, hey, yep, I'm in the air, I'm flying. The people you speak to are absolutely amazed how and why it's made.
We leave Llangollen and head for the River Severn, helped on our way by the locks and canals built by those transport pioneers more than 2 centuries ago.
The Llangollen Canal joins the Shropshire Union Canal and links with Britain's longest river, the Severn, which rises on Plynlimmon Mountain in mid-Wales. The trickle soon matures into a boisterous mountain stream, hurrying through a steep and narrow valley, cascading, vaulting the rocks, growing in energy on its 220-mile journey towards the counties of England and the Severn estuary. These uplands have always been a stronghold of the red kite, swooping, swivelling his distinctive chevron tail. The Severn reaches Llanidloes, a place of charming buildings. Not least the 300-year-old timbered market hall. And the river water played its part in the prosperous manufacture of wool and flannel. And in the Severn region, prospectors and miners searched for lead and silver.
We've crossed the border now into England, into the county of Shropshire, as the River Severn winds its way down to the Bristol Channel.
The Severn in Shropshire flows broad and muscular, and though its wooded banks are picturesque, its story is of furnace men who shaped the future with blazing metal. This cast iron span of 1779 heralded that industrial future. It gave its name to Ironbridge, home of a tribe of self-taught pioneers who learnt the potential of iron. The story of these inventors and their achievements makes Ironbridge a World Heritage Site. 10 museums show what a remarkable industrial beehive it was. In this one small area along the Severn, workshops, factories, furnaces, and the inventive spirit opened up the industrial frontier.
This was the area where all the raw materials came together and made the Industrial Revolution possible, making particularly iron and using local coal and iron ore and so on, but also using local clay. So the local products in this small stretch, kind of 4 miles of deep gorge, were all furnace industries. They were either smelting iron or making pottery. This was the busiest place in the world. There were more furnaces and forges in 2 miles of river here than anywhere in the country. Go back 200 years, this was incredibly busy. Between the navigable part upstream, Poole Quay, Welsh Pool, and Gloucester, in the 1760s, there were nearly 400 boats registered. Of those, 139 were owned within a mile of where you're standing upstream and downstream now. So this was actually the busiest part of the whole river at that period. They were loading in the 1760s 100,000 tonnes of coal a year there, so it's an incredibly important place. Somebody counted from the Coalport Bridge, looking back to the wharfs there in 1836, counted 72 vessels loading coal at Coalport.
At the heart of things in this valley, at Coalbrookdale, the son of a Quaker, Abraham Darby, revolutionised cast iron making and produced it cheaply and efficiently, and demonstrated its strength, versatility and elegance. And like him, his son and grandson put persistence and experiment at the core of their enterprise.
They made cheap iron possible. They opened up new markets, new products. Each of the firstborn Darbys was sensibly called Abraham, and Abraham the third is the one who built the bridge that's behind me. And he was kind of trying to slightly outdo the achievements of his father, so he built this wonderful PR exercise to sell iron. This is an ad campaign to say iron is great. It says on the bridge, this bridge was cast at Coalbrookdale. Coalbrookdale was the name of this area. Nobody believed it would work because this was a completely new material for that, and nobody actually ordered any more bridges until a massive flood, worse than the river levels we have today, destroyed all the other bridges in Shropshire and left this one standing proud. And then people said, "Ha-ha, Mr. Darby's right. Well, I'll have a new bridge, please."
Although Iron Bridge always had its eye on the future, it still likes tradition and likes having fun. Hence the annual coracle regatta, the art of persuading a circular boat not to go round in circles. A coracle sits lightly on the shoulder, and its ancient design varies from river to river. Everything depends on the paddle stroke. And first, catch your coracle and sit in it. And before that, build it.
The basic idea of a coracle is that it's a boat that anybody can build. So it's all hammer and nails technology, very simple. We start with the seat, this seat, and onto that build the top hoop, the gunwale as it's called, which is made out of two thicknesses of ash laths like this. And once that's established, then the plan of the coracle is set. Seat posts are then put underneath it, and that will give you more or less the cross-section of the coracle. And then it's just a matter of weaving laths through until you've got enough to support the area of calico that you're going to put onto it. After you get to this stage, it would simply be painted 3 coats of bitumastic, and that would seal it up completely. And then it would be finished off with another lath which goes around the inside of the gunwale, like so, front and back. And then another one which will go around the outside. And that will just finish the thing off. It makes it look neat. And the wood obviously protects the edge of the fabric, which is likely to get worn. And then it's just a matter of getting in and paddling it. The getting in is the difficult part, certainly. Yeah, that's the bit where most of the adventures happen, is the getting in. The problem is that the coracle is so light and that your weight is so high up that you've got to get your backside into the middle of it in one go and then keep your weight central. If you're trying to paddle it the way you paddle a canoe, alternate sides, it would just wiggle backwards and forwards like that. Okay. So what you do is you put the paddle in front and you draw a sort of a lying down figure of 8 in the water, and that draws you to the centre of the stroke. Canoeists call it a sculling draw stroke.
From Shropshire into Gloucestershire and the city of Gloucester. In the 19th century, a busy inland port full of small ships.
Gloucester's docks grew in response to the booming freight trade along the river and canals. The dock buildings date from the 1820s, and although many of them fell into disrepair, they've been restored to a new usefulness and dignity.
What we're seeing here is the main basin of the docks at Gloucester. This is the terminus of a ship canal which brought the ships right up into the centre of Gloucester, more or less, to discharge cargoes into the warehouses that you see around here. And most of them were built for storing sacks of corn, and they were owned by different merchants who would put their name up on the top there. Mr. Herbert, Mr. Kimberley, Mr. Philpotts, and they would import the corn to Gloucester that was going on to be sent up through to the Midlands and to feed Birmingham and the Black Country. And nowadays the docks are used more for leisure and pleasure, such as the trip on the King Arthur there. Around us we've also got canal boats that people live on during the summer or perhaps come for at the weekends. There are other river cruisers that come down from the Midlands and enjoy this stretch of waterway. And of course lots of people walk around the docks. It's just a pleasant area. There are museums to see. There are the National Waterways Museum and the Soldiers of Gloucestershire Museum. And the other warehouses now are occupied by offices and as apartments.
As Hugh says, one of the old docks buildings is recycled as the National Waterways Museum. And as such, it's a storehouse of photographic records. And today, Chris Witts, who worked for many years on the local waterways, calls to see the film archive, partly the story of his own life.
Bradley, what sort of ships do you handle through here?
Well, you're so right in calling this a full-size port, Mr. Reed, because we did...
Seeing this footage brings back so many memories. It's the sound of the engines, the ships being unloaded at Avon and then at Gloucester on the way up to Worcester, and seeing the ships which I was associated with. It's just fantastic. I just love watching this film. I left school in Gloucester at the age of 16 in 1960. And I went from being a boy instantly into a man working on estuarial tanker barges, which was a very, very hard life. And seeing this footage again, it reminds me of that, and it in a way makes me wish I could turn the clock back and do it all over again. In reality, it was a hard life, an interesting life, and it was so fascinating.
Walking beside the Severn today, Chris recalls the night in 1960 when two vessels fell victim to the ever-present dangers of the river.
Quite a few small craft were coming out the river that night. It was very dark, and a fog rolled into the Severn off the banks, the Berkeley banks, and two tanker barges, they were swept up the river sideways into the Severn Railway Bridge, which ran from Sharpness across the other side of the river to Lydney, 22 spans high in the air. Both barges pinned on the bridge. The bridge is fragile, and skipper George Thompson, skipper of the Arkindale H, looks up and he sees two of the spans shaking above him, and suddenly they drop across both barges, cut the barges in two. The Wasdale H carrying cargo petrol, there's this explosion, the petrol ignites, the black oil spews out of the Arkindale H, fills the river up. The river's ablaze, the barges are ablaze, and George Thompson, fortunately, was saved. He's a strong swimmer, he swam for it, as was Jimmy Dew, skipper of the Wasdale H. But sadly, 5 men lost their lives that night. Always remembered as a Severn Bridge disaster.
Chris ended his working days on the river as skipper of a grain boat, the last of the breed.
Today I reflect on my life on the Severn, and it's strange to think, here am I at the end of my working life, and I've done so much. I've had the privilege of working on it as a young lad. I've had the privilege of working on it when I was towards the end of my working life. I've written books about the Severn. I've got a big website. I go for interviews with television and radio. The River Severn has been good to me.
With the onset of autumn, flocks of long-distance migratory birds magically find their way to the Severn estuary and their beautiful home at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust at Slimbridge.
There's lots of different varieties of wildfowl that winter here at Slimbridge. They're coming in from, as close away as France and Germany, some of them. Some of them, like the pochard, are flying 3.5, maybe even 4,000 miles from Central Asia to spend the winter here. Buick swans, they're very much a speciality here. That's about 2,500 miles that they're flying from Arctic Russia. So most of them are Arctic nesting species, the ducks that we get here. Some of them are sort of much further way east of here into Asia. We've got the mud flats, the sandbars, which are full of life out on the estuary, so that feeds a lot of the wading birds. Hundreds of thousands of birds use it as a roosting site, and they say sometimes roost in the day, so sometimes at night, depending on the species, but they will fly out from these roosting areas to feed on the fields around the Severn estuary. So that's what makes it so important. It's a good, safe roosting area, and there's lots of good feeding for them.
In the thin dawn sunlight, a handful of surfers wait in the shallows of the Severn. It's a thrilling moment. Like veteran surfer Steve King, they're all waiting for the arrival of a spectacular tidal phenomenon. They'll be riding the magic wave. And here it comes, its power growing. The Severn Bore.
The Severn Bore is a spring tide, a high tide, and as it comes into the peninsula between South Wales and North Devon, the tide gets funneled in, and when it gets around about Avon mouth, the riverbed also goes up, so you've got this funneling effect, so all that water gets compressed into a small space, and the water's got to go somewhere. So what happens is it goes up, trips over itself, and that creates what we know as the Severn Bore. Height-wise, it ranges from about a foot, 6 inches, up to we've seen kind of 9 and 10 foot on a really big tide. Well, the difference between riding the Severn Bore and a wave in the ocean is a wave in the ocean will average out about 10, 15 seconds, and that's it. I can get on a wave down in the estuary here and ride it for over an hour. The longest ride I've done has been 7.5 miles, which you're never going to get in the ocean. So, and it's the beauty of the place as well. You can be surfing along on a wave and you're looking through the English countryside. You've got cows in the field and there's ducks and swans. So it's a whole thing, really.
As the surfers slide and ski upriver, I continue my journey across the estuary to Bristol. I'm with the Severn Area Rescue Association in waters where the rise and fall of tide is the second biggest in the world.
Well, it looks pretty smooth at the moment, Jake, but it can get pretty rough too.
You can do. I mean, it's quite deceiving, the Bristol Channel. One of the biggest problems is the sheer strength of the tide. When you consider that, you add to that the effects of the wind over the tide or with the tide, and you can go from a nice, kind, benign afternoon like today into something which is quite horrendous. And that's generally because of the strength of the tide. So to compensate for that, the sailor needs to be absolutely planned where he's going to go and what the sea conditions are likely to be on the day.
It's very dangerous for people who try to walk at low tide, isn't it? The tide can come up suddenly and ambush you.
Yeah, there's been a number of incidents, quite recently actually, where the unwary fisherman has gone in effectively just to do some fishing by the bank and has actually been swept away. And it's quite a common occurrence within the Bristol Channel for the tide to catch people out. And it just happens as quickly as people can walk up the beach, for example, the tide will be creeping up behind them. So before you know it, what has turned out to be a nice dry fishing point is now completely surrounded by water.
And so you can't walk fast enough or run fast enough to escape?
Running's, you can probably run it, but walking, definitely not. In some big tides, the tide comes in very, very quickly, and that's one of the factors of the Bristol Channel.
Well, after all that rocking on the old roller coaster of the Bristol Channel and the Severn, it's something of a relief to turn off to the quieter waters of the River Avon and to pass Avonmouth docks on our way to the old Bristol docks, 5 or 6 miles away. Right in the heart of Bristol, the docks tell us eloquently of one of Britain's greatest commercial ports. The replica of the wooden ship Matthew takes us back 5 centuries. The adventurer John Cabot sailed her to Newfoundland from Bristol in 1497. Like his contemporary Christopher Columbus, he had no idea of the existence of America. From a wooden ship to a masterpiece in iron, the steamship Great Britain, back in the very dock where she was born in 1843, under the eye of her creator, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. She was a giant in every way, fitted with the world's largest steam engine, and she crossed the North Atlantic on her maiden voyage in just 15 days. New York was agog. Brunel's baby was a wonder ship. She was the spirit of her age. Now we leave the docks and head upriver to discover more of the Avon story.
Several rivers in Britain are called Avon, a word with Celtic roots. Avon in Welsh, it simply means river. All in unity, the lovely stream, the pleasures of Bath, its golden stone and elegant crescents and terraces, planned with a Georgian sense of proportion and space. All this thanks to the 18th century entrepreneurs who transformed the city into a fashionable resort.
The only way to develop Bath was obviously to build Bath, and the best way to do that was to build it in its natural stone. And I strongly believe that it's an early relationship between John Wood and Ralph Allen that sees Ralph Allen buying up the stone quarries at Combe Down. He didn't really understand about stone. John Wood understood about stone, and they went into partnership. And of course, Prior Park, which John Wood designed for Ralph Allen as his country estate, was basically a huge billboard advertisement about how wonderful Bath stone could be.
The vision of men like Ralph Allen and John Wood gave Bath its character, its squares and parks and gardens, a celebration of civilized style. And all this made possible by the navigable river.
The Avon navigation was a way to make the river navigable up to the port of Bristol. It had to deal with a lot of changes in gravity and also private ownership. So they did cut across various sections of the River Avon, cutting out kind of loops. And John Wood, for instance, was involved with the Twerton cut, where he talks about he introduced the real use of a spade to Bath. The importance of this scheme was that it enabled Bath to supply the fashionable company who were visiting Bath with all the things that they desired. I think it's fair to say that if the Avon hadn't been made navigable to Bristol, that Bath would not have been the success it was in the 18th century. There was a great demand for people to be able to come and go between Bath and Bristol, and there were regular passenger boats going up and down the river, and also the supply of quality goods that enabled Bath really to have one of the best heydays in 18th century Britain. There has always been a weir here at the site of Pulteney Bridge. There were 2 mills on either side of the river, and they weren't going to change that. So this really became the end of the navigation scheme. This is as far as you could get, but it was the centre of the city of Bath.
The Roman city grew up around baths that were among the most splendid in the Roman Empire. They were ruined and buried for 12 centuries and only rediscovered in 1879. Restoration gives us an idea of their ancient grandeur. In the steam from the natural hot springs, we might imagine those Romans bathing before their glory faded and their legions were called home. It says something about the sheer size of the waterway network in Britain that we could travel by boat from here on the Avon to the eastern edge of England. But for the time being, we've plenty of travelling to do on the Thames.
Here, 14 miles from its source in the Gloucestershire countryside, the Thames is no longer an infant. It has maturity and personality. It's liquid history, gathering its stories as it journeys to the sea. St John's Lock marks the limit of the navigable Thames, and quite rightly, Old Father Thames himself presides over things around here. After all, it's his river.
Like Avon, Thames is another ancient river word. Julius Caesar knew it. And the riverbanks put you in mind of Ratty and his chums in the wind in the willows. And you might get a lucky glimpse of a rare watervole. The river flows through Oxford, the great teacher, 8 centuries of dreaming and learning. Its colleges forming the oldest university in the English-speaking world. And while other rivers in the world are symbolised by paddle boats and steamers, the Thames and its tributaries have the quaint and romantic English punt, and of course, a gallant young man to propel it.
I think what happens mostly, I don't know whether it's something to do with Oxford, but the men who come down here seem to be particularly unopen to advice. So you get the chaps kind of coming down and you always ask every customer, have you punted before? Oh yes, plenty of times, yeah, lovely, fantastic. And you're like, so you know what you're doing? Oh yeah, well I'm sure I figured it out. And it's normally those chaps who have the highest swim rate. About 2 minutes in, I think the classic one is giving the pole a really good kind of hearty shove, and then it gets stuck and you're trying to pull yourself in off the back. And if you're not careful, they'll have you in as soon as they look at you, these things, particularly in a muddy stretch like we're in at the moment. So I think, yeah, the most common amusement is pole getting stuck. People think I've got to hold on to it for some reason. even though we provide everyone with a paddle to get back to them. Thankfully all the poles float. Yeah, it's a difficult reaction to override, trying to let go of a pole. But you've kind of got to weigh up which is more embarrassing, falling in or losing your pole. Lose the pole every time for me. Working on the river is something which I don't think you can fully appreciate until you've done it. Great kind of at oneness with working outside. You learn to see how the river changes during the year, and how to respect it, how to appreciate it. And particularly with punting as well, it's one of the things which has dwindled over the years, but is such a traditional aspect of Oxford life that I'm quite kind of proud in a way to keep it going and to make sure that it kind of lives on. I don't think I'd swap it for much, actually.
Still in Oxfordshire, still on the Thames, we head for a river event quintessentially English. Indeed, the Goring and Streatley Regatta is as English as putting up a marquee, as a red sports car, as a straw hat, as boats rowed with gusto. No corporate entertainment, more the local people having fun. The regatta had died out, but was revived in the 1990s by the Goring Gap Boat Club, which roped in a local landowner with a view to having races back on the river.
Some of these fellas had a party down at the Catherine Wheel in Goring, and they decided to take me out for lunch and see if they could revive it. Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch, we all know that. And it was a good lunch. And then they popped the question, can we revive the Goring and Streatley Regatta? Well, I'd agree to anything. And, and actually, I'm glad I did, because it's good fun. The river's not used as much as it was, unfortunately. There aren't so many boathouses on the river, and they're having a hell of a good time. And it's a village party. We don't have a village fete now, but I mean, look at all these people here. Yes, it's good. Very good thing to do.
Not as deadly serious as the Oxford and Cambridge boat race, but more enjoyable. Exciting enough to get the supporters shouting hooray and encourage more people to take the plunge.
Well, we try and encourage lots of people to come and take up rowing, try and be very inclusive, any age, any ability, and just to get people to enjoy the river. A lot of rowing is highly competitive, and we'd like to think that we could give everyone a chance to have a go at rowing and to enjoy the river.
Towards the end of the day, the prizes are handed out and the trophies are hoisted. And everyone starts thinking about next summer's regatta.
Most of the traditions that thrive along the Thames involve simply messing about in boats. But one of these customs also celebrates not only boats, but the families of swans that are so much a part of the river's charm. And there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world.
It's a pageant. Every July, the boats go out with flags flying, taking part in an old English ritual, swan-upping. An annual census counting swans along a stretch of the Thames, led by the Queen's Swan Marker, with watermen from 2 London livery companies, the Vintners and the Dyers. The watermen circle their skiffs to make a corral. Now they can gently lift out the swans and cygnets and take them ashore to examine them for disease or injury. Swan-upping dates from the age when swans symbolised wealth, and the Crown claimed them as royal birds, so they had to be counted. Today, though, the emphasis is on conservation. and spectators enjoy a picturesque costume drama. For the Queen's Swan marker, education is also part of his job.
En route, we do meet with many schools, and we talk to them a little bit about the River Thames, a little bit about the wildlife, and particularly the swans, naturally, because that's what we're here for, and a little bit of history on the royalty side of it, of the ownership. Because the Queen does own, she can, by right, by a royal prerogative, own any swan in the United Kingdom if she so wishes, but this is mainly exercised on the River Thames.
The watermen pull on their oars, and there's usually a crowd to watch the upping of the swans from steamers and boats and riverside houses. But to some spectators, it must all be a very English puzzle. Sighting a flock of swans, the excited watermen race to another roundup. In the 1980s, swan upping revealed a fall in the swans' numbers, caused by the birds swallowing lead weights on fishing lines, so the weights were banned. Today, the annual census shows the numbers are up. More swans and cygnets are lifted ashore, out come the scales, and soon the birds are back where they belong. After that flurry of excitement, the Thames calms down, and river residents like the Canada geese get back to their browsing.
Like many of Britain's rivers these days, the Thames has a good news story to tell. Throughout the country, a clean-up has brought back birds and fish once driven out by years of pollution.
Until halfway through the 19th century, overcrowded London put huge pressure on the Thames. Fish disappeared, sewers disgorged directly into the river. In 1858, the stench of the Thames was so bad it was called the Great Stink, and members of Parliament fled into the streets with handkerchiefs over their faces. It's a different story today, thanks to the Victorian engineers who built sewers and saved London. Here on the River Lee in the city's East End, near the restored 18th century mill house, the Environment Agency monitors the river's health. The condition of elvers, young eels, gives a living indication of the purity of the water.
Well, here we are trapping elvers that have swum up the River Lee from the River Thames, and they've come up this ramp here into this holding tank, and we will then help them get over this barrier here, because obviously they can't actually swim through this. That's why this structure here is put in as on a temporary basis to enable those juvenile eels like that on there to actually migrate up through to our rivers. The situation for water quality and fish population in the Thames was chronic back in the 1950s and 60s, with only two species of fish recorded during that time. Since the increases in water quality and the improvements to our sewage works, we're now seeing more and more species. Just recently we recorded the 152nd species of fish recorded in the Thames, and that just shows the improvements in water quality that are occurring. It's a very, very good time for the Thames with increasing water quality. We're seeing more important fish species come back, like salmon and sea trout. Although in low numbers, we wouldn't see these fish in our rivers without these improvements in water quality.
2,000 years ago, the River Thames gave birth to its great city. For centuries, London was the largest metropolis in the world, the heart of a maritime empire. These giant warehouses hold a mirror to that dynamic saltwater story. They were built as part of the new West India Docks complex in 1802. And just imagine the bustle of those times and the aroma of those exotic cargoes, the tea and the coffee, molasses, sugar and rum. Well, this warehouse has been transformed into the brilliant museum in Docklands. The tea, the coffee, the molasses have gone, but the epic remains.
Here we explore the memory bank of London's river and enter a fabulous vanished world. And we have this marvel, the Rhinebeck panorama, painted 200 years ago, a gull's eye view of the Thames chock-a-block with ships.
This depicts London in the early 1800s, about 1806. As you can see, it's a forest of ships and their masts. It's all wooden sailing ships. This is the legal quays, where the ships would wait to be unloaded with barges and lighters. That's the Sufferance quays on the south side of the river, and the ships also had to wait there to be unloaded as well. London Bridge was the block that prevented ships moving beyond this point. This is the lowest bridging point for London and absolutely vital for London's economy. The ships came in and they had to wait here. They might have to wait 2, 3, maybe 4 days, sometimes up to a week. During that period, they could lose their cargoes quite easily. The cargoes could be lost or stolen or deteriorate. So during this period, the amount of shipping coming into London was increasing enormously.
And of course, this is not even the half of it.
Absolutely
There's much
not.
more Thames down
I mean, we're
here.
standing here now where Tower Bridge would be in another 100 years' time, and beyond this point, there are more and more ships waiting to come in, right the way down to far as Wapping.
Busy, busy.
Busy, absolutely. I mean, you could sit there for weeks sometimes waiting to be unloaded. If you only possess one ship, there's all your livelihood sitting there waiting. Not very good for you as a businessman.
Very different days on the Thames, Sue.
Yep, this is the Frost Fair of 1814. This is the longest and hardest. It lasted for 3 months. People lived on the ice during that period, and they had fun on the ice. There were fairs, people had tents, there was cook shops and braziers, and they had races. Spent all their day on the Thames.
Had a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Quite dangerous though. The ice moved. Obviously, the ice flows were melted and reformed again. People fell in and couldn't get out. But yeah, very dangerous, but great fun as well.
Ships brought abundant wealth, but there was also the pain of departure. A Victorian painting shows a poignant farewell to soldiers off to war, and also the pain of the returning wounded, a human theme unchanging. On the waterfront at Wapping, the headquarters of the Thames River Police. Founded in 1798, it's the oldest police force in the world. The sheer wealth of London's docks, the traffic jam of ships, the rich cargoes, inevitably attracted pirates and thieves. Merchants wanted protection, and in those early years, the rough, tough police were guaranteed a violent life. In their round-the-clock patrols, the Marine Police accumulate their intimate knowledge of London's river, its dangers, its water traffic, and its crowded waterfront.
Well, the idea of the River Police was because of the West India dock companies and the East India dock companies, when the ships used to come up into the Pool of London. We're talking about ships like the Cutty Sark and also one in the models over there in the frame. They used to come up, and of course the only thing they wanted to do was, the captains and the mates of the ships, was to get the crew off as soon as possible, because these guys have been at sea for sometimes 6 months at a time. So that only left the skipper and the mate on board the vessel. And we used to have pirates, yes, that's right, pirates. And these were big, burly guys in rowing boats. And we're talking about 8 of them in a rowing boat. And they would row up to these ships at anchor waiting to get into the docks. And they would plunder the ships and also take any cash or monies, because these ships dealing in the West Indies, etc., and the docks, they used to carry cash to pay off the crews, etc. So they paid the crews off, which left the ship with only 2 people on board, and they used to overpower the vessel. Well, what happened was the West India and East India companies formed up their own security men to row around these ships to try and protect the ship and its cargo and its money from these so-called pirates. Well, the Crown realised that they were actually saving the Crown duty, revenue, and that's when we started to form up properly as a Marine Police Division. Well, the way they worked is that from this station, they would row out around the ships at anchor and basically keep an eye on the ships to make sure that none of these other guys were about in their long rowing boats. These were big guys that were employed from here, and more often than not, they came from far afield. They were not Londoners, they were guys that were brought in. They were very, very big guys, and they dealt with things their own way more often than not. In the early days, all the police officers were issued with cutlasses. That was there to protect themselves against the pirates that were actually out there, which were also equally of the same size.
As always in the fight against criminals, the police have to embrace the latest technology. So it was a big step forward when they received their first motorboats in 1910. Inspector Chris Connelly explains the evolving role of the Marine Police.
Since 1798, when the Marine Unit was originally formed, things have obviously changed considerably. There are some similarities, but obviously the events of 9/11 and 7/7 clearly have impacted on us, and protective security is now a huge part of our daily work. However, we provide a policing response basically on the river to any type of policing incident, much the same as our colleagues on land side. The only difference with us, of course, is we have a little bit more specialist skill and training to work in this environment. But typically, you know, a working day can be a call from a member of the public to a disturbance on a boat, to a disturbance on the foreshore, down to someone trying to jump in and commit suicide, which we sometimes tragically have, down to recovering bodies. But also we have the same sort of problems our colleagues have on boroughs. You know, you have nightclubs and pubs. Well, we have a very similar thing on the river. We have a large number of vessels that have functions on board, that have licences. We call them party boats. You know, we can quite often be called to a disturbance on a party boat or a punch-up. Whereas part of our daily role, we'll board vessels coming into London, and they consist of 2 types really. Private leisure vessels and also commercial vessels, which can come from anywhere across the world into the Port of London. Your typical private vessels will be yachts, canal boats, you know, things like that. But again, we don't know where they've come from. So it's important, you know, as part of our police presence to board those vessels, and we can use our terrorism powers if we need to. And we regularly do that, particularly around central London, where of course the threat level is so much higher. We rescue people under some very different circumstances. We've had a guy who cycled off a bridge one day, and we recovered him. We couldn't recover his bike, unfortunately, but we saved him. And we get some people from abroad, a couple of guys who came from Australia, who had a bit too much to drink, who decided to have a swimming race one day across the Thames. And people, I think, don't realise just how dangerous the Thames can be. You can get tides of up to 4.5 knots, which is actually very, very strong. And a weak swimmer, particularly during the winter, you know, won't last very long in the river. So we do get a number of accidents and accidental drownings. Well, I feel very privileged to work on the river. It's a fantastic environment to work in. I've always had an affinity with water. Indeed, my father was in the Navy, and the river changes from year to year. I've been privileged to work here for 5 years now. There's a massive, massive amount of change that has happened on the river. From generation of new wharfs and buildings to new iconic sites. Canary Wharf's almost doubled in size, and the river looks completely different at night. You know, it's absolutely beautiful at night. But along with that beauty does come danger. And of course that's what we're here to enforce and to save people and rescue people from that danger, and to provide our policing service. I have to say it's a privilege to work here, and I think most of my colleagues feel the same. In fact, I'm sure all of them feel the same.
London's river is the rolling stage of history. Riverside and skyline reflect our changing ambitions. But the Thames at London remains, as ever, the place of work and play. As long as London stands, the river will be centre stage. Although restless with currents and tides, the river itself stays constant. And, rushing or tranquil, rivers are there for us to ponder on. Our favourite rivers are old companions.